So we're ready for our next speaker. He's a software craftsman who builds web applications with ASP.NET, Node, React, and Vue. He's a Microsoft MVP. He's a published author, and he's a frequent speaker at conferences, user groups, and community events. He goes all over the world speaking about different topics like today's topic. He's passionate about teaching and learning high-quality software development, and today he'll be presenting feature flags, separate deployment from feature release. So please welcome Rob Richardson.
This is so much fun. Here's the part where we get to learn a lot about feature flags. Now we're going to start out slow, but we're going to dig in really deep and kind of get acclimated to this. Hopefully, if you've been procrastinating doing feature flags because you're like, I have to wait until I buy something, hopefully I can dissuade you from that. Here's the part where I tell you I'm definitely going to post the slides on my site tonight. Have you heard that today? Did it work? Which is why I have already posted the slides on my site today. So let's head off to robrich.org, robrich.org, click on presentations. Here's feature flags. You can link to the slides and to the code. It is up on GitHub and on my site right now. Achievements unlocked. Woo! Yeah. Feature flags. So this is the nature of feature flags. We have some function that says if the flag is set, do it the new way, otherwise do it the old way. And we have some data store. That's it. That's the entire methodology of feature flags. Thanks for coming. No, I'm just kidding. What's really cool then is we can play with stuff like, well, where do we put the if blocks? Where do we put the data store? And that's where this gets really fun. That's where we'll start to dig in. So here's some anti-patterns, and if you've heard this, then this is a good use case for feature flags. Code freeze. You ever have code freeze? That is developers not being productive. Let's not code freeze, let's just turn it off. Let's deploy this but not that. That isn't ready yet. Well, or just turn that off and deploy it anyway. Don't deploy it yet, it's not done. Well, then don't merge the pull request in yet. If you've heard any of these are the scenarios that yield feature flags. Feature flag is a great methodology where you can have code but have it turned off. And when you're ready, you can turn it back on. And so that's the methodology. You develop the new code right next to the old code, and then at runtime, you can choose which version that you want. And so we'll start off leaving the code off, and then in time, we will turn the code on. Now this is really cool. We can now deploy when the developer is ready and release when the business is ready. We don't need to kind of synchronize things. Let's deploy on midnight right before the day that we launch this. We can deploy whenever we're ready, and then when they're ready to enable the feature, we can turn it back on. That's great. We have separated deployment from release. Feature flags allow us to separate deployment from release. We can deploy whenever the feature is done and then just turn it off. And then we can release it to users whenever marketing wants to turn it on. That's great. And the cool part is we don't need to redeploy then. We just turn it on. So yeah, that's the methodology. We start by deploying it and turning it off. And then when we're ready, we turn it on. Cool. That's the methodology of feature flags. You don't need to buy things to make this happen, though we'll talk about how buying things can definitely be helpful. We avoid late-night deployments. We avoid out-of-order deployments. We can turn features off that are misbehaving. And ops can start to tune the app based on turning off features that may not be working out well. That out-of-order deployments, I love to double-click on that one. It's like, well, can you undo the history so that we can release this but not that? And it's like, well, it's never been tested in that way before. Well, yeah, but just, and that's what yields the emergency hotfix. Because, well, in that rebasing, maybe we don't do it quite right, and now features don't settle in. Yeah, don't do that. Just deploy it the way it was built. So that's that methodology. We have some if block that checks to see if the flag is set. And if it's set, then we do it the new way. And if it's not set, we do it the old way. And then we have some data store that lists each of those features and whether they're on or off. Cool. So where do we store this configuration data? And this is where we'll kind of dig in of how we can use different places to store it in different ways. We could store it in a config file. Maybe we're misusing our configuration source as a feature flag source. We can do environment variables. We can put it in a database. Or we can use external services. It's easy to query the flag data on the server, but what about browser apps? How do we get the feature flags into the browser apps? Well, if we're using a library, then they often have a browser thing, but now we have to put the secret into the browser to be able to authenticate to the config store, and now we're losing secrets because they're client-side. So instead, we can create an API that just exposes the feature flags. And we'll actually see that today. And so perhaps it accepts a flag name and it returns the value, or maybe we have a get all values that returns all of them. Maybe we're going to prefix our client-side feature flags with client underscore or public underscore to be able to make sure that the secret ones don't leak. But we can go grab all of the client-side flags and then do the state that we need to. Now what's interesting here, especially with client-side flags, especially with asynchronous data stores, what do we do in the meantime? What do we do when it's loading? What do we do if the data store is unavailable? And so we want to make sure in our code that we have sensible defaults. Typically, the sensible default is to turn it off because, well, if we don't want to release things until they're ready, then off seems like a good thing. Perhaps even if we can't get to our config store, our feature flag store, then off just disables that functionality, and it's not all that traumatic. So client-side, perhaps we leave all those features off until we can call into the API, and server-side, we leave those features off until we can get into the config store. The best practice here is that these feature flags should be temporary. Maybe you have a handful of them, probably a dozen max. If you notice that you're starting to use feature flags as kind of permanent established things, then that's not feature flags, that's configuration. And maybe you have configuration that turns things on and off, and that's definitely fine, but those aren't feature flags. Move those from the feature flag setup into the configuration store. You also want to make sure that you're not starting to use feature flags as authentication mechanisms or even authorization mechanisms. This isn't a matter of turning modules on for certain customers. That is in the authentication system. You definitely don't want to misuse the feature flag store as an authentication store. Make sure they're temporary, and as soon as this feature has been in place for some time and is good, then remove the feature flag and remove the old code. By the way, that is really fun deleting code there. It's a great way to increase code coverage. It's a great way to remove technical debt. It's a really fun PR to do, to just say, yeah, I deleted all this stuff that we're not using anymore. It's really cool. So one trick that we can use as a best practice is in our feature flag store, add an expiry date. Now, of course, this is at best a guess. I don't know, is this 30 days? Is this 60 days? And I like to create a test in my DevOps pipeline that will go validate that none of the flags are expired. Okay, if the date passes, then we may push it forward a week or a month. Definitely don't set it to like the year 3000 because now it's no longer a temporary flag. But we may need to bump it forward a little bit as our guess of when this code expires starts to materialize. But if we have that expiry date, then that kind of helps us remember that these flags are temporary and that we should come back and remove them. Context. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about feature flags is we can start to not just turn them 100% on or 100% off, but rather turn them on at certain intervals, turn it on for certain users. Perhaps we have beta users or a canary release, and we want to be able to give access to these very helpful customers that might be a little bit more sympathetic if things don't quite work exactly the way we expect. So we can use that context to be able to turn on flags at certain times. Let's take a look at maybe the user or their roles, their subscription plan, the location, system load, error rates. We can use that to add additional context to maybe turn them on partially but not completely. But we also need to make sure that this is not an authentication system. Don't use this to grant and revoke features to customers. That needs to go into the authentication system. This is just temporary things to give certain users early access to features. So let's talk about ways that we'll implement this in the data store. And I love this because we're going to dig into a whole lot of code examples for each one. The first totally low-tech solution is a config file. We might even choose to override certain flags with environment variables to be able to turn them on or off. And the cool part about that is we now have a very simple mechanism. We probably already have a config store, and so we'll just add some more values to that for our feature flags. Now the downside to this approach is that that config file is probably one of the build assets. So that means to change a flag probably requires a build. Now this could be good and bad. If I'm flipping a flag, it's probably also a commit, a pull request, an approval process. I now have an audit history, and that's pretty cool. Because I have that audit history, now I don't need a dashboard that says who changed it. I can look to Git for that. So let's take a look at that feature flags. Here's that Git repository, which you can get online right now. We'll take a look at one config. I've pulled that up in VS Code, and we have .NET examples as well, but let's dig into the Node examples. So I have here in my routes, I have a bunch of features. And so, for example, here's a route that says feature 1. Let's run this one. I'm going to say npm start, and we'll go to feature 1. Localhost 3000, there we go. And we'll go to features, feature 1. And if the flag is enabled, then we get this message. That's perfect. Actually, let's zoom in a little bit there. There we go. If it's enabled, we'll show enabled. If it's disabled, we'll show disabled. How did we get that flag? Well, I have this util here that goes and gets that data. And in this case, that is just going to look in the environment variables, which means, for the most part, it'll read this .env file. So I can say 1 is on, 2 is off. But I could also choose to override that with environment variables at runtime. I can inject configuration into my Kubernetes pod, and that will allow me to turn on and off features. I'm going to try catch around JSON parsing this because quote, false quote is actually truthy, and I want to actually consider that falsy. But in case that they put in a value like spaghetti, well, yeah, that's not a true or false, and so I want to do that. I want to double check that. I'm also doing the double negation to be able to ensure that that's a Boolean value for anyone that's consuming it. I also have a getAll flags that will just loop through all the entries and dump that content into place, which is pretty nice. So now that we've got feature flags, let's take a look at feature 2. Well, feature 2, now we're starting to talk about, well, the old way was I just sent text. The new way is I want to be able to send JSON. And so I'm going to trigger this back and forth based on whether this flag is set. So let's come over here to feature 2, and we can see that it's off right now. Let's come in here and we'll change this to on. And of course, because this is a compile time thing, now I need to restart my server or redo the build to get the new config into place. And now that I've done that, I can come back in here, and now I get JSON instead of text. That's cool. Now, I deployed this code with both the text and the JSON feature in place, And when the business was ready, when consumers were ready to consume the JSON, I could just turn this on, which is perfect. Back in the routes, we can take a look at feature 3. Now, in our config file, we didn't have a feature 3. Here's a great place of sensible defaults. Well, what if I ask for a value that isn't set? Well, what we did here in our thing is we said, if there isn't a val, then let me return a sensible default, in this case, off. So I'm going to come here into feature 3, and we can see that feature 3 is off. Perfect. Now, this was super low tech. We just leached into our config system to be able to do feature flags, and so that was a great way to go. Let's also talk about a client-side mechanism. So let's do npm start here. Oh, nope, cat package.json. I've, of course, forgot the script. Npm run dev. And so now on 4000, it will now call into the server to go get those config values, and we can see that feature 1 is enabled, feature 2 is enabled, feature 3 is off, and we also even have a refresh button that will re-query those flags if we wanted to. So feature 2 is on right now. Let's restart the server and refresh, and we can see that now feature 2 is off. Cool. So we took a look at doing feature flags inside of a config, and we saw that we didn't need to buy anything. We didn't need to wait for a purchase order to go through. We could just use the systems that we have to be able to launch into this. Next, let's move this to a database. Now, the cool part about this database is that now maybe we have an admin dashboard that allows us to be able to edit the files in the table. We can kind of take more control over this. We're probably doing a whole lot of data access in our app already. It's not a huge lift to get from just a simple config file to something that has a little bit more substance to it. If it makes sense, we can probably build an admin page around it, or maybe just go into the database and flip it. Now, the cool part is it's really, really easy to change these values. The downside is, how do we tell the app that the value changed? Is it going to query the table periodically, maybe once an hour, once a day? Well, what happens if one server notices it quickly and one server notices it after an hour? We might have an inconsistent behavior for that time until all of the apps discover it. We could go through doing a rolling restart of all of our pods, and that might be a great way to be able to do it, but maybe that's overkill for here. Alternatively, maybe the feature just doesn't show up consistently for a while, and that if that's okay with your business, then that can be great too. We're going to start it at 8 p.m., and by 9 a.m. when all of the customers show up, it's all set. So let's dig into our samples again and take a look at how we might do this in a database. Now, here in the database, we have our same routes, and this file is unchanged. We're still going into the get flag mechanism. I didn't show you the get all, but that just goes and gets all flags, and the client side does that too. And similarly, we're now looking in the data repository. So here's the feature flag repository. We're just doing a select from our data store. The database in this case happens to be SQLite, but that's just an implementation detail. And in this case, we actually say, if there aren't any data in the table, let's go create some dummy things. And in this case, it'll actually create random values. So we'll get to see together which ones get turned on and which ones get turned off. So let's step into that demo. cd02 node npm start, and we'll also go into our client for O2, npm run dev. Cool. So the cool part is from the user experience here, let's go into features all. And we can see the 3 flags. In this case, 1 is off, 2 is off, and 3 is on. In the console, it's always fun to see what fake data we got set in there. You can also see the expiry date happening right there, which is really cool. And then in our client-side app, we see that same behavior. We still have the refresh that just re-queries it. And so as we start to flip data in our database, we can now get the behaviors in our app. We can also see the loading state here. In this case, I didn't choose to turn it off, but rather I chose to show loading until the feature flag data was available. If that's an acceptable behavior, then that's an option there too. Great. So in this case, we moved from a config file to a data store. And the beauty there is now we have a little bit more central control. We don't need to redeploy to be able to change flags. We can just go into the database. There is kind of that ambiguity there of how do we get various instances of the application to notice that it changed. That's kind of the biggest downside. But now we can start to talk about context overrides. We can look at various details about the user, maybe their geography, they're in a certain, they're in North America as opposed to Europe, or we can look at their subscription plan, their authentication details. This is not an authorization system, but we can use that to get additional details. So I'll also show you the unit test associated with this one. Here's that test. And that feature flag test that just says, go find any feature flags that should have been expired and fail the build if there are some. Yes, it is a non-deterministic build, but it helps us know that these flags are obsolete and we should remove them. Okay, next up, let's talk about user context overrides. And the client is the same, but here in the source, in our database, we now have 3 tables. We have the feature flag table. We also have a user table that probably already existed in our app somewhere else. And then we have a user flag table. Now, the interesting thing here is that maybe we don't have user-specific overrides. In that case, we want to go back to our feature flag table. And so as we look at the code, we can say, I have to do 2 queries here every time. Let's go get that feature flag. Then let's also get the feature flag for this particular user. So let's switch over to number 3. npm start, and we'll switch our client over to number 3 as well. npm run dev, and the server-side experience is exactly the same. But in the client-side experience, we now have the ability to log in. Now, this is not an authentication system. Here in this client app, my login component is really dumb. It just says, give me a username, and I store it. So definitely don't use this authentication scheme. But what I was after was, can I get a value? So in our setup, we see that we have fake users for John and Jane. So if we log in as John, so unauthenticated, feature 1 is enabled, feature 2 is disabled. If I log in as John, I can see that I have feature 1 and feature 2 that are slightly different. If I log out, I can log in as Jane. And I could also log in as Heather, who doesn't have any default data here. Well, in this case, we're actually using the data in the feature flags table. There are no user-specific overrides for this user. Excellent. So that was really cool to get to see context overrides. Now, the cool part about context overrides is the flag doesn't need to be 100% on or 100% off. It can be kind of indeterminate. We can make it user-specific. We can give some users access to these early features. On the downside, we've now increased the testing burden. maybe the feature's on and maybe it's off. So our tester is now creating this matrix of, well, what if flag 1 is on and flag 2 is off? Well, now what if flag 1 is on and flag 2 is on? If we have 5 flags, now we have 25 different scenarios. If we have 50 flags, you can only imagine how long it takes to test it. Part of the benefit of feature flags being temporary is we probably only have a half a dozen. If you have 25, 50 feature flags, that is a problem, and that has nothing to do with feature flags. So if you've only got 5 flags, yeah, flipping them on and off is a little bit weird. Hopefully our automation will be able to test each of those scenarios, but we're not creating a huge burden on our testers. If you have too many flags, yeah, you need to start obsoleting some of those flags. Or maybe you get less granular with the flags that you're building. So we did take a look at context overrides. That was really cool. Next, let's talk about getting data from a service. Now, the cool part, I don't have time enough to demo all of them, but I have 4 different services that I have here, code samples here for. And so you can definitely start to explore each of them. We will look at LaunchDarkly and Azure App Config today, but there are a lot more services. If you Google for LaunchDarkly or Harness, and then you'll find the feature flag service that works exactly for you. So one of the downsides that we had in all of our roll your own implementations was, how do we tell the application to restart? Well, the cool part about a service is they usually have webhooks set up so that it will just periodically poll. Maybe it's once a second, once every couple of seconds. 98, 99% of the time it'll say nothing changed, but they may choose to push events into the SDK as part of that. And so your apps can usually really quickly learn when a flag has been set, and that can be really helpful. You will usually locally cache these flags. We'll get a really great dashboard that probably has audit history so we can know who changed what flag. Some of them will prompt us for reasons, and that can be really helpful in auditing flag differences. And they have typically they have advanced features, like we can do A/B testing. Let's randomly put people on one flag or the other. Or we can do the user context overrides based on particular users. We can turn them on and off on a schedule. We have analytics based on when the flags were set and how many times the flag was called. It's really cool to be able to leverage these services, because then we have a whole lot of really, really cool advanced features. On the downside, we now have created this asynchronous call into that service. What do we do before the features load? Now, depending on the SDK, we might even choose to just wait to start up our app until the feature flags have loaded. And that's definitely a decent alternative. In our Kubernetes readiness probe, we just go query the thing, and once it says it has the config, now we can put that pod into service. But also, what if the service is down? We do need to have sensible defaults here. Based on locally caching, perhaps we still have the results from yesterday, or from an hour ago, or 5 minutes ago. And so that might be sufficient. So there's lots of different tools, and as you grab these slides from robrich.org, you can click through to each of them and learn more about their service. Let's start out with LaunchDarkly. Let me switch over to 04, LaunchDarkly, npm start. I'll switch over my client to the LaunchDarkly one as well. npm run dev. The other dev, the one that's spelled dev. There we go. So we still have the same API surface on localhost 3000. Oh, we do see, though, that it opened that connection to LaunchDarkly, which is great. Here in the code for LaunchDarkly, we can see that we've pulled in the LaunchDarkly package. And in our startup, we go grab the LaunchDarkly environment variables. Nope, that's not it. here in get flag, so feature flag repository, that's where I did this. We just pull in the launch darkly SDK. We'll go grab that launch darkly code, which I'm definitely not going to show you, and then we can go call into launch darkly service. Now the cool part is we do have context overrides in a really elegant way. So in this case, I'm just saying here's the user and their name, and so that will give us context-specific overrides. So our app looks really similar. If we go get all, launch darkly only has 2 flags configured, and so we only get those 2. But we can see that in our app, with a status code, oh, I bet I know what happened here. There we go. I was pulling in the wrong service. There we go. Now that started correctly. And now we have our feature flags. So what's interesting here, feature 2 is enabled, but feature 1 is disabled. Let's come here into our feature flags, and let's open up feature flag 1. And we can just come in here and turn it on. Right now it's off. Let's turn it on. Save. Why do I want to do this? Utah.js is awesome. Let's save the changes. And now we have a great audit history of when we used this flag and how we turned it on. And so back in our application, right here, we can refresh the flags, and now we see feature 1 is enabled. Nice. Now maybe on the client side, we did a similar thing where either we have a WebSocket or we poll against this to try and find when the features are changed and then pull that in. Or maybe to get a consistent user experience, we just go with the feature flags that they have, and once they refresh the page, we'll pull in the new feature flags. But that was great. The cool part about Launch Darkly is really focused on feature flags. So we have a great product that is really focused on exactly that thing. By comparison, Harness does a whole lot of things with configuration and also feature flags. Harness also just bought Split.io, and so Harness's new API is Split, which is really interesting. So here's Split's experience as well, where I can go into the, or I can log in, and that will work out as well. Azure App Configuration. Azure does a lot of things, and so Azure App Configuration can be really cool for feature flags, but it also can be cool for storing all kinds of configuration. But this feature flags is very specific there. So let's go into our Azure one. For Azure App Config, npm start. And now our service is using Azure instead of Launch Darkly, so we can go into that. Into the only file that is different in this example is this feature flag repository, and so we'll just pull in the feature flag details from the feature management portion of Azure. The interesting thing about feature flags is it doesn't have a get all. So in my get all, I just go get each one of them. Yeah, Harness doesn't have a get all either, so I'm not thrilled at that. But the cool thing is now I can come into my app and load up the things. 1 is disabled, 2 is enabled, 3 is off. So let's turn on 3, and if we refresh, now, now it did not load really quickly. Oh, because my server is caching it. Let's reload the server. There we go. And now I'll get this, and now feature 3 is turned on with Azure App Configuration. So the cool part here is we had a great service that allowed us to be able to turn flags on and off and then instantly take effect in our application. We saw, especially in the Launch Darkly one, where that SDK was just had a socket open. Whenever that thing changed, it immediately flowed into place. We also have a great dashboard of who changed what when, and so we have great control over this. We can put administrative controls over the details of how those feature flags change. One thing that's kind of interesting about the services, though, they don't have a great place for putting the expiry flags. LaunchDarkly actually has a specific feature that says, if a flag has not been called recently, we're going to assume that that flag is stale, and we'll help you remove the flag. You need to also go remove the code, but called recently, maybe that's not a great metric, because QA is probably flipping the flags back and forth on every test run to be able to validate that both sides still work to catch context-specific overrides. And so I've actually asked LaunchDarkly, can you add a flag expiry date? And they're like, well, but we already find stale flags. And I'm like, that's not the use case. So unfortunately, these services don't have a great expire the flags thing. You may need to keep that elsewhere in your application. So the cool part is we looked at 4 different data stores, and in particular for the 4th one, 4 different services to do this. The cool part is we could just misuse a config store as a feature flag. We just have some more configs whose values are true and false. And we can override those with environment variables that allow us to be able to tune these at runtime. We still need to restart our application, but we're able to do these feature flags without having to buy something. We could then upgrade to moving into a database where we're already storing data in the database for other things. And the cool part about this table is there's 2 columns, the key and the value. The key is a string. Yeah, let's argue with our DBA about a primary key being a string. But then a second column that is a bit column that is either on or off. That's excellent. So that database is a really simple mechanism to be able to get a little bit more control, global control over it, where you can just flip the flag, and then maybe do a rolling restart of each of your pods to be able to get that flag to take effect. Or if it's okay for the application to maybe not notice that the flag changed in an hour or a day, then you can just wait for them to recycle naturally. In time, we also upgraded to moving to an external service. LaunchDarkly is great. Azure App Configuration is great. Harness is great as well, and you'll probably find exactly the service that you want, that it gives you the correct amount of executive control and also the correct amount of developer features. Ultimately, what I hope we take from this is that feature flags is a really simple concept. We have an if block. If it's on, do it the new way. If it's off, do it the old way. And then we have some data store, of which we explored lots of places to put that data store, but that's feature flags. We don't need to wait until we can buy something to enable feature flags. We can just create this mechanism and store this wherever it makes sense. Does it make sense to put it in a config file or a database? Does it make sense to use user-specific overrides? Does it make sense to put it in an external service? Ultimately, these flags are temporary because as soon as the new way is good enough, delete the old way code and delete the flag out of the data store. And now your code base is simpler. You probably have better tests around the new code anyway, so your code coverage just went up. That's kind of a nice boon. We can avoid stopping developer work. There is no code freeze. We just turn the feature off if it's not done yet. We can also not maybe turn on the feature 100%. We can let more sympathetic users access these new features earlier and get early feedback. Where this works, it works with new modules or replaced algorithms. That's really cool in that we can just put the new code right next to the old code and then put in that if block. It really doesn't work with modifying existing code. Now, it depends. You could just copy and paste the function and call the copy the old code so that the Git history shows that that's the new bit, and then go tweak the new function and kind of get it exactly the way you want. It's easy to lose Git history in that process, though. If you're doing a bug fix, just fix the bug. You don't need a feature flag around fixing the bug. Just fix the bug and push it out, and away it goes. If you're doing wholesale rewrites, that's not a place for feature flags because, well, your API surface is probably a lot different. So just flip over to a new URL. Towards modifying existing code, we talked about how it probably will mess up your Git history there. And one of the things that's really cool about feature flags, we are separating the deployment from the release. We can deploy when the code is ready, and we can release to users when the business is ready. We no longer need to synchronize these things. The slides are up online right now at robrich.org. Thank you for coming.